Welcome to the Introduction to Epistemology Syllabus, PHI 3300. This is a very concise version of the syllabus. To see the full details, refer to the PDF available on Canvas, as well as the other information on Canvas. I am Dr. Michael Labossiere, got a PhD at Ohio State University, been teaching at FAMU for a long time. My office is 203 Tucker Hall. You can reach me by phone in my office at 850-561-2839. But of course, this being modern times, best way to contact me is either through my email, here, michael.labossiere@famu.edu, or if you're enrolled in a class with me, which presumably you are if you're looking at this video, you can use the messenger function on Canvas, which is pretty convenient and handy. In terms of the purpose, goals, and objectives of the course, here they are spelled out in bureaucratic detail, also in the syllabus, but the gist is this. Epistemology is the theory or study of knowledge. So the very concise version of the course purpose is to introduce you to various epistemic theories in epistemology, ones that are historic, such as our good dead friend Descartes and his famous skepticism, as well as more recent ones. There'll also be a focus on reasoning and the context of epistemology, and in terms of the goals of the course, essentially to learn stuff about epistemology. Again, all the bureaucratic details are spelled out on the syllabus, and we'll go over more in class, of course. For my office hours, these vary from semester to semester. This is intended to be a fairly generic syllabus, so I don't have to keep re-recording it over and over again. So see the particular PDF semester syllabus, and also look at Canvas for my particular office hours. For the topics, the course is broken into 4 sections. If you've taken a class with me before, you're familiar with my way of the 4. And each section is somewhat self-contained, and for each section there is a test and one exam. More on that in just a bit. So part 1 is the introduction. That covers our good dead friend Plato and his opponents, the skeptics. This also includes an introduction to argument basics. There is no assumption you've taken philosophy before, despite this being relatively advanced philosophy class. So you'll get the basics you need to write the philosophy paper. We'll also look at the sophists, which are essentially foes of Socrates and Plato, and then we'll look at Plato, our good dead friend Plato, his classic epistemology, looking at such things as his famous line and the even more famous cave. And then we'll finish up part 1 with skepticism, which is something that existed before Plato, but also persists to this day. And this is the philosophical view that we seem to lack knowledge. Then we'll head into part 2, looking at one of the big classic problems in epistemology, one which was made interesting by the original Matrix. I recommend seeing the original Matrix, and shall remain silent on the latest version, Matrix Resurrected. So the problem of the external world basically is this. How do you know that what you're experiencing is really real for real? That this is all not just a dream in your mind? Or how do you know, to use a sci-fi scenario, that you're not simply in the Matrix? That this is not what is real? Now this goes way, way back, but probably the most famous incarnation of this is in our good dead friend Descartes' work. He comes up with this notion of the evil demon in the dream problem, which he didn't invent, but he lays it out in his famous 6 meditations. We'll look at him because he's pretty critical to epistemology. Then we'll look kind of generically at foundationalism and coherentism, and then we'll go to our good dead friends John Locke, who proposes a rather pragmatic approach to solving this problem. And in a way, as we'll see in class, it's kind of the video game approach, when you're essentially we'll see more of this when we talk about it, but keep that in mind. And then we'll finish up with our good dead friend David Hume, who basically goes sort of weird skeptical. Then we'll head to part 3, looking at the a priori, the criterion, and the famous Gettier. We'll begin this part looking at our good dead friend Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, a German rationalist, and we'll look at his epistemology. Then we'll go to our good dead friend Immanuel Kant, a very famous dead philosopher, and then on to Chisholm's classic problem of the criterion, and then the Gettier problem, which has bedeviled epistemology for quite some time, and then look at, sort of generically, at the broad views of externalism and internalism. And then we'll wrap it all up in part 4 with the problem of induction, the ethics of epistemology, and other minds. Now, the problem of other minds is kind of a smaller version of the problem of the external world. The problem of the external world is the whole thing of like, how do I know that what I'm experiencing is really real for real? The problem of other minds is, how do I know these other entities that I'm encountering, how do I know that they have thoughts and feelings as I do? And this can be presented quite often in science fiction contexts, like how do you know that like a machine can be thinking? And this, results in such movies as like Terminator and explicitly the movie Ex Machina. Bertrand Russell presents one sort of stock argument as to how you solve this problem, argument by analogy. We'll look at a book chapter that I wrote on testing the moral status of artificial beings, looking at, kind of inspired by Fallout and Blade Runner, looking at how to test moral status and how does it matter. Then we'll turn to the problem of induction generally, and then more specifically Hume's problem, which is the problem of, roughly put, how do you know that what you've observed will continue to be true? And it's often presented as like a present future problem, but it's not just limited to that. But it's the presentation is often, how do you know that what is held in the past will hold in the future? And not just things like investments or change, but things like fundamental rules of reality. Like how do you know that fire will still be warm in the future? Then we'll finish up looking at the ethics of belief, various readings here, and close it out with Locke's classic piece of On Enthusiasm. And that is the 4-part structure of the course. In terms of the grades, your grade depends on 4 main things. There's one paper, 30% of the grade, and there's an entire video dedicated to this. There are 5 exams, the best 4 of which count, 35% of your grade, and there are a bunch of quizzes, the best 10 count, 30% of the grade. There's also assessment, which consists of some pre-assessments, some post-assessments, and some surveys. And I'll discuss assessment in more detail in the course. For the quizzes, they're on Canvas, and they consist of 5 true-false questions. They're on a 5-minute timer, and once you start it, it keeps on going. So if you leave, the timer does not stop. Each one tends to cover about a week of material, but I kind of get in the habit of like writing lots and lots of quizzes, and the more quizzes the better, because you just need 10 and it keeps your best 10 good ones, so every extra quiz is an extra chance to get a better grade. And you only need 10, so if there's like lots more, you simply don't have to complete them once you've gotten 10 perfect scores. Canvas has a interesting grading system. If you've been a student long enough to be familiar with systems like Blackboard, Canvas works a little differently. So if you're not familiar with how Canvas does grading, you'll want to look at my grade guide on Canvas to see how that works, so there are not any unpleasant surprises. Now, Canvas works correctly, but it can be somewhat misleading. If you interpret it one way and you get it wrong, it can be rather unpleasant in terms of how that works. And again, there's nothing secret or hidden about it. It just works in ways that you may not be familiar with. So be sure to consult that grade guide. For the paper, there's an entire guide to the paper in PDF, PowerPoint, and video. The gist is you pick an issue in epistemology. Not surprisingly, the paper has to be about something relevant to the course. You can do a draft. The draft is ungraded in the sense that it doesn't score towards your grade in the course. I do put a tentative score on it so you know how you're doing, but the draft itself is not a actually graded assignment. There are 3 deadlines for the paper. The +5 deadline is the extra credit. You turn the paper in by then. That's the when the paper is supposed to be turned in, you get +5 for being on time. Things, of course, can happen, and more so, it seems, with each passing year, so there's also an emergency deadline, which is always a week later, which is full credit. You don't get the +5, but you get full credit for the paper. You don't have to do anything special to use the emergency deadline. It's there intended for cases where things, go wrong. And so rather than messing around with like excuses and, special forms, etc., it's just everyone gets, if they need it, anyone who wants it gets an full extra week to complete the paper, to handle things like computer problems, etc. Then at the end of the semester, for the end of classes, there is the 50% deadline, the last day of classes, that Friday, which you can turn the paper in still for half credit. Now, Canvas, of course, the way I get this set up is, since you could do any of these, I've set it up so that there's actually, each of these is a grade going to the overall paper grade, but Canvas is set to only keep the best one of these. So if you do, the +5 deadline, you don't have to do the others. Canvas will put a 0 in each of those correctly because we didn't do them, but in this example, the +5 deadline will be your paper grade. And again, be sure to look at the paper guide if you're not familiar with how Canvas does it. And if you are familiar with Canvas, every professor can set up their grade system quite differently. So probably a good idea to look at how I've set it up. I mean, it's nothing weird or unusual, but some people use percentages, some people use points, and so it's good to see how it all works, just so you know what's going on. For exams 1 through 4, they consist of, each one individually, 25 true-false questions, 25 multiple-choice questions, pulled just from the material for their section. So exam 1 just covers part 1, etc. They're on a 60-minute timer, starting as soon as you start it, and keeps on ticking even if you leave the exam. So be sure to plan accordingly. And once again, to repeat what I said before, Canvas does keep the best 4 exams, but the way it does this can be misleading if you're not familiar with it. So be sure to see the grade guide to see how Canvas does this to avoid any unpleasant, easily avoidable surprises. For the final, it's like the other exams, except it's not. It consists of 50 true-false, 50 multiple choice, 120-minute timer, so basically double, but it pulls random questions from all 4 parts. It's comprehensive. Now, since the best 4 out of 5 exams count, that means that once you have 4 exams, then all the other work, etc., you could elect to not take the final. You'd get a 0 on it, but Canvas would keep the best 4. Now, before deciding not to take the final, be sure to use the what if function on Canvas, which is explained in its own guide there, to check to see what happened if you didn't take the final. Or what would happen if you did take the final. You can put in hypothetical scores. Oddly, I can't use the what if function on Canvas, only students can. So if you say, hey, what do I need to get on stuff? I can't just do it easily on Canvas. I would have to go and do some calculations. But you can very easily and conveniently do that, and I'd recommend that, checking to see what would happen if you did or did not do things. Grade scale is pretty standard, 90 to 100A, 80 to 89B, 70 to 79C, 60 to 69D, 0 to 59F. As I just mentioned, be sure to use the what if grade function on Canvas, explained on Canvas, to see what your grade would be or wouldn't be if you did or did not do various things. The way Canvas drops grades is correct, but again, can be misleading if you're not familiar with the way Canvas does things. And be sure to check your grades. You're required to check your grades, regularly, and inform me immediately if there's an issue that needs to be addressed. Canvas logs everything meticulously. They keep backups, etc. And I will back up the grade book regularly in case, nothing has happened so far, but, this is the 2022, so who knows what can happen. Hopefully nothing bad. But anyways, check those grades to make sure that things are going well. There's a bunch of policies on the syllabus. I won't read them at you because that would be pointless, but they're all spelled out in great bureaucratic detail, such things as academic honesty, attendance, plagiarism, Canvas, etc., cheating, which is bad, enrollment, extensive absences, etc., grade discussing grade information, incompletes, makeups, last day, unusual special circumstances. I'll just say a tiny bit about that. If you find yourself in unusual or special circumstances, which I cannot specify in the syllabus because they would be unusual or special, contact me as soon as possible to let me know what they are and how they impact the course. Excuse me. If I can work with you in it, I will do so, and to see that you are able to complete the course. You should do so as soon as possible. If, for example, your work schedule changes, and so now it overlaps with the course, the class a bit, you can let me know and say, hey, I'm going to be, my work has changed, I have to do this and this. Can you work with me? I'll say, yeah, sure. I'll be happy to work with you to, let the work and academics, balance out, because, life is difficult and challenging, and I don't want to add more difficulty and challengingness to people's lives. Now, if someone contacts me 3 days after the final and says, oh, some things happened early in the semester, but I never told you, and, can I do some things? There may not be much I can do. So I know things can happen unexpectedly and surprisingly, but let me know as soon as possible so I can work with you. And the sooner you let me know, the more I can do. For the Academic Learning Compact, that's spelled out in detail in the syllabus. Also is here on the slide if you wish to look at it. There's also the Quality Enhancement Plan. This course is not part of it, but so you're familiar with it. For the particular calendar for the course, be sure to see the PDF semester syllabus. Also, Canvas has its own convenient calendar system, which lays all that stuff out there. Final important thing are the due dates and available until dates. Now, a due date on Canvas is when the work is due. There's also the available until date, and you may be thinking, well, what's the difference? Well, here's the difference. Available until is self-explanatory. That is the date at which whatever the work is no longer available. The due date is when it's due, and these two, the available until and due date, might be the same, but they might be different. In terms of why they might be different, well, the main difference in my course is for the exams. So there's one exam for each section. They're always due the Friday of that last day of that section. So the end of week 4, exam 1 is due. But of course, things can go wrong, people need makeups, etc. So rather than messing around with makeups and all that stuff, what I do is I just have an available until date for the exams. So for example, exam 1, you should do it at the end of 4 weeks, end of part 1, because it'll be fresh in your memory, etc. But if things go wrong, you have another month that it's available. So the due date is when you should do it. So what if you don't do it by the due date? Well, as long as you do it by the available until date, you would get the relevant credit. So for the exams, as long as you complete an exam by its available until date, you do get full credit. And the due date's there basically to have something on your calendar to say, hey, I should probably do it by then to get it out of the way. And when I'm thinking about it, when everything's fresh in my mind. But the available until date is when it's available until. There are some things where there is no difference, so be sure to check. For example, with a paper, the +5 deadline, the due date, and the available until date are identical. There's no difference, so be sure to complete them by the due date. For the paper draft, there's a deadline for that, and that is available until date. Be sure to complete it by then. If you wish to do a draft, it's ungraded, so it can't hurt your grade. For the paper deadlines, there's a +5 deadline that gives you the +5 extra points, the emergency deadline that gives you full credit, and the 50% deadline that gives you half credit. Now, if something goes wrong with Canvas, let me know as soon as possible, and if something goes systematically wrong with it, which has not yet, at least during an actual deadline time, we'll address those if those issues arise in a fair manner. Now, in terms of me monitoring, the work, etc., I set as a courtesy to students the deadlines with some exceptions. Be sure to check, for the finals, for example, the deadlines are at normal time, but the normal deadlines are 11:59 p.m. But I don't stay up that late. So if something goes wrong at, say, 10, and you email me, I won't be able to do anything until the next morning. So generally you'll want to try to do the work like either like before the deadline, the available until date, or you do it earlier, in the day, so if something goes wrong, I can help you. Okay, so that brings us to the end of the super concise short version of the syllabus. Again, be sure to see the full PDF. I think it's hitting about 16 single-space pages now, and just keeps getting bigger and bigger every semester. There's also information on Canvas I've referenced, so be sure to check that out as well. So stay safe, and I'll see you in the future.